You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. Hey, thanks for joining me for episode 2, where we're going to be discussing our first meeting experiences, talking about the preconceived notions of what we thought SAA was before coming to meetings, and how we felt after. But before getting to that, I wanted to share some other information about our program. Like I shared before in our first episode, this podcast is a project of the Bay Area Intergroup of SAA, sometimes noted as BAISAA Incorporated. The official Bay Area website is bayareasaa.org. And we are not affiliated with the ISO, which is the International Service Organization of SAA. They are responsible for the international website, saa-recovery.org, as well as putting out all of our literature, answering emails and phone calls that come into the central office of the ISO. The ISO put out the first edition of the Green Book, Sex Addicts Anonymous, back in 2005, and I wanted to share a passage from Chapter 1, Our Addiction. This is the first 2 paragraphs that can be found on page 3 of the Green Book. Before coming to Sex Addicts Anonymous, many of us never knew that our problem had a name. All we knew was that we couldn't control our sexual behavior. For us, sex was a consuming way of life. Although the details of our stories were different, our problem was the same. We were addicted to sexual behaviors that we returned to over and over despite the consequences. Sex addiction is a disease affecting the mind, body, and spirit. It is progressive, with the behavior and its consequences usually becoming more severe over time. We experience it as compulsion, which is an urge that is stronger than our will to resist, and as an obsession, which is a mental preoccupation with sexual behavior and fantasies. In SAA, we have come to call our addictive sexual behavior acting out. I love this chapter so much, and I wish that I could read the entire thing here on the podcast. But since it's copyrighted material from the ISO, I can really only use a couple paragraphs at a time. And I'll be definitely using some more from this chapter in future episodes. So I had been meaning to read this passage on the first episode, but forgot to include it. And for myself, I definitely knew that sex addiction was a thing before I made my way to the rooms. But I wasn't quite sure what to expect from a meeting of SAA. But I'll be getting into that in the conversation that I share in a little bit here on this episode. The paragraph on what sex addiction is was really mind-opening for me, that it's not only the act, the compulsive behavior, but that it's also the mental preoccupation, the obsession. So coupling those two, really gives me a better understanding about what sex addiction is. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight these couple of paragraphs is the term acting out, so that we would have a basic understanding of what it means when we start talking about acting out. In a future episode, we'll be talking about the 3 circles. The circles are a way that we define what our abstinence is. Our inner circle is basically the behaviors that brought us to the rooms of SAA. For instance, masturbating to pornography, acting out with prostitutes, or having anonymous sex. Things like that, exhibitionism, voyeurism, those are typically inner circle behaviors. Middle circle behaviors are things that we identify that are slippery behaviors or put us at risk for going into our inner circle or acting out. And the outer circle behaviors are healthy behaviors, things that we're looking to do to occupy our time after stopping acting out. For me, it's playing guitar and hiking and photography and things like that. So I wanted to have on this podcast here, for those that aren't in the rooms of SAA, to have an understanding of, some of the terminology that we throw around during our conversations. So for this episode, we're going to be talking about our first meeting experiences. And there are a few paragraphs from the second chapter of the Green Book called Our Fellowship, the section on meetings, that I really wanted to highlight here for this episode. And this can be found on page 10 of the Green Book. Many of us first come to Sex Addicts Anonymous feeling deeply isolated and ashamed of our behaviors and past actions. We may believe that no one could understand us or relate to the things we had done or been through. Discovering that we are not alone is a liberating experience for us. It is a great comfort and relief to know that a fellowship of recovering sex addicts exists and that we have somewhere to turn to help us recover. Meetings are the heart of the SAA fellowship. At meetings, we emerge from our shame, secrecy, and fear into a community of people who share the common goal of freedom from sex addiction. They give us the opportunity to talk about our lives and our addiction with other sex addicts, people who have had similar experiences and understand the problems we face. Attending our first SAA meeting is a crucial step in moving away from isolation into fellowship, and ultimately into recovery. For many of us, our first meeting was a freeing experience. We sat among others like us and heard their stories. It did not seem to matter if we identified with everyone's behaviors. We were often amazed to find other people honestly sharing their challenges around sex addiction. As we witnessed their honesty and openness, we felt invited to speak candidly about ourselves. Revealing our sex addiction to others gives us a sense of freedom and relief, even if we initially felt some fear or resistance. And for myself, I definitely felt fear around entering the rooms of SAA for the first time. I also wanted to share one paragraph from our daily reader, which is also put out by the ISO, called Voices of Recovery. It's a daily meditation book, and this comes from August 22nd, which is on page 235 of Voices of Recovery. And I'm skipping the quote at the beginning and just jumping to the first paragraph on this page. I was a little apprehensive about going to my first meeting of Sex Addicts Anonymous. I was afraid I'd find a room full of unshaven, drooling perverts in trench coats. What I found instead were perfectly nice, ordinary people who happened to have the same addiction that I have. I met people who used to act out the way I did, but some of them had been sober for years. I heard members share honestly and openly about things that I never talked to anybody about. Their openness gave me permission to get honest too. And in the conversation that I'm about to share, I have a lot of the same feelings that the author of this meditation had. And as I was looking for things in Voices of Recovery about meetings, I found this and was like, oh my God, this is, totally me. But I swear this was not written by me, and I love whoever wrote this. So anyway, now we're to the main part of this episode. So this was a conversation that I had in the fall of 2019 after my home meeting, which is a Thursday night meeting. And I put up the digital recorder and recorded this conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
Okay.
It's the way God intended music to be listened to.
Mono.
Yeah. I like the topic about, what you thought about sex addiction beforehand and coming in and
Yeah, that's a good topic.
what it's like now.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, I came into, of the three of us here, I was the
You were the pioneer.
really. Pioneer.
You were, I was like Lewis and Clark.
Back
Sex addiction.
in 2002 was when I came in, and you guys know that the main thing I came in here was for pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And, my wife had known about my pornography use and the masturbation and everything. But, where our relationship went is, we used to use pornography together and as part of, our regular sex. And then eventually it became, her time to go to bed, and then me saying, goody goody, it's my playtime now.
Right.
And so, I would focus most of my energy towards collecting as much pornography as I could while she was asleep. And just night after night after night, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and then coming to bed, getting up a couple hours later to go to work, just was really miserable for both of us. Our intimacy went away.
So at what point did it finally, how did you get from that to here?
God. So, I have recounted, watching the Oprah Winfrey show, and she was talking about, had guests talking about alcoholism and drug addiction, and the people that were, the way they were talking, it's like the way their lives were, and it's like, oh shit, that's me to a T. But, it's not anything about alcohol or drugs, but the same type of behaviors are there.
Compulsiveness.
So I recognized that I had a problem. And I told her, I've got a problem, and I'm going to stop. 6 months later, I'm doing the same shit. And with all of the pornography collecting that I did, a lot of it was illegal behavior. I got into darker and darker subjects. So she was aware of, the various things that I looked at, but with the internet you can go so much further, and so when she found out all the stuff that I was looking at, she's like, you're fucked up, you've got a problem. And so she looked up programs for sex addicts, and I'm so grateful that what she directed me to was Sex Addicts Anonymous. So the other programs, SLAA, SA, SCA, I never went to any of those. So I went, just really not knowing what to expect. And so I had anticipated it being the typical trench coat pervs.
Yes.
So
I had that same idea.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be people living under a bridge with like a hook, like a hook for a hand. And,
so walking in
Yeah.
and hearing everyone's stories.
Right.
It's like, I am just like these people, and you know, a lot of them are, you know, businessmen, and you know, all different realms of types of people.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how about you, Tim?
Well, if that is my real name. Yeah, I mean, I think my idea of sex addicts were just they were the guys that got murdered in prison, you know? So it was like the worst. That's one of the worst labels that you can possibly have in this society. Yeah. Never mind for when I was contemplating it, I had a kid, right? So my daughter was just born at the height of my acting out. In fact, my acting out was, I have a rich heritage of pornography. And that was just like a training ground for my later acting out, which was sex outside of my marriage and paying for sex and all of that stuff. And I had this whole ritual where we were talking in the meeting tonight. Someone brought up about knowing that what you're doing isn't right, but you talk yourself into doing it anyway. And so, like, I knew that it was illegal to see prostitutes, and so I would leave my phone off in the car, and I would leave my ID out. I would just take the cash that I needed to pay for the services. And I had this whole briefly moral like wrestling, because my daughter was actually due to be born at a particular week, and if you know stuff about babies, they don't always come when they're scheduled to arrive. So really I was supposed to be reachable. So it was like, well, am I going to go and act? Am I going to go do this, like keep this appointment? Or knowing that my wife or somebody might call saying your wife's in labor. And I kept that appointment. And so that was I never really forgot that story. Like, ooh, that was one of those places that I went farther than I ever thought that I would go. And that's just something real that happened. I can't fantasize my way out of thinking that I behaved differently. I can pretend that didn't happen. And so I knew that there's a unique kind of suffering that happens when you talk one way and you live another. Yeah. And that's the way that it was for me. I kept behaving in these ways and then getting on my spiritual high horse with everybody else in my life and being like, well, you should have integrity if you're going to, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then, the clearest way I can describe it is turning my soul black. I just couldn't. I was miserable, just depressed. And again, you made an external claim to your wife, like I won't do this anymore. Mine were all internal, like I'm never gonna do this again, and I could not keep that promise. And I knew enough, being involved in another 12-step program for codependence, I knew enough of the 12 steps, and I'd gone to like a Zen center, and I was, if anyone was denying the crap out of this, it was me. And so that was a tough point. But I was really scared to, and I used the power of the internet for good and found an SAA meeting, and that was just the luck of the draw that it was an SLAA or the other, which I'm sure are fine. Like, I don't have anything against those programs. This just happened to be the first one that popped up, and all sorts of weird stuff from that. Like it was the men's meeting was 3 blocks from my house on a Monday afternoon, and at that time it was important. A men's meeting appealed to me because I had so much shame of what women would think of me. I was horrified to think that there would be women present in the meeting. It's a totally different story now, but back then, that was just, I was mortified. And I was just sensitive as hell. I cried like a baby those first couple of meetings, and those are fond memories.
I remember.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I had a big thing to get over about going to a meeting for sex addiction. I just thought that was, you went there and you met your parole officer outside, and then that was it.
And once you got there, what did you think of us?
Yeah, I mean, I was amazed. Okay, for one thing, people talked freely about subjects that we just never even brought up at home.
Yeah.
The biggest one was probably masturbation. Yeah. That word, like nobody said that word. They might even, I don't even know. There were so many things that were just tacit understandings. If somebody was in the bathroom for a very long time, I found I found a stack of dirty magazines underneath a sink, and you can figure out what's going on from there. Nobody tells you about it or talks about it. So I mean, I think that was one of the most shocking things, was to have other grown men being like, well, I struggle with masturbation, and I was like, you can't say that word,
right?
And
right.
Yeah, I just thought that was incredible. That incredible level of honesty. Because even in the 12-step program I was in for a long time, sex rarely came up as sort of a topic. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like it was just a real trip to be in a room with the 12 steps being focused around sexuality and hearing people talk. Beyond that, finally getting to know people and getting to know people like common interests outside the meeting too was a big one for me. But what was your first take on like sex addiction meetings? Like what?
I remember them talking about some Hollywood actors saying they're in sex addiction recovery, and I was like,
oh yeah,
like they would have multiple affairs. And I would be on my high horse. Look at that dirty man, sex addict. What the? And
well, he was. You weren't. He was.
Yeah, that's right. I wasn't doing anything like that, and I clearly was doing all those same exact behaviors that these people were also doing. I was told to come to. My therapist told me to come to an SAA meeting. She was the one that said, you need to go to SAA, you're a sex addict. When I had finally disclosed a majority of my acting out to my therapist, and I had never told anybody anything, of all the things that I had done over my lifetime. And when I finally divulged, she said, when I'm leaving, she said, we need to talk about sex addiction. And my whipped my head around, and they're like, what are you fucking talking about? And the next week, and then I had this, and the next week was, she said, you should go to the Thursday night meeting. I'm like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, that's what I have to do. And I also have been in another 12-step program previously, so I knew about the steps. I knew how these meetings worked. I knew all of that stuff. So it wasn't I'm really grateful that I was able to come in and go, okay, I know. Not that I know how this program works, but just a general idea.
Yeah. For me, this is my first and only 12-step program. I have a number of friends in 12-step stuff, but I came in blind, so I have just no idea what the fuck it was about.
And especially my fear was coming in as a woman, because I thought there would be all these men here, and they were all gonna like I'm hot shit, thinking, they're gonna want to have sex with me when I get there. Because there was a movie that I had watched recently where these people were going to 12-step meetings, like sex addicts meetings, and then they would go off and have sex in a closet somewhere.
Was it Blades of Glory? Do you remember that?
No, it wasn't. No, it was. I think it was called Choke. It's based on the.
Oh yeah.
So I think that's what it was, and I thought that's what happened to 12-step sex addiction meetings. Just completely no idea when what I was getting into when I walked in, and I came, I didn't know where the meeting was here. This is a big, and I walked in kind of late, and I was just scared shitless. And then I looked around, and there's people from all walks of life, and there were other women in the meeting, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a good thing, I guess. And I was still partially in denial when I came into the meetings that I was a sex addict. I thought, maybe this was a function, because I'm also bipolar, that maybe this was a function of my mental illness. It wasn't until, really getting into these rooms and going, oh, wait a minute, I'm a sex addict, that I have, I can't stop this. I could not stop, I would try. I mean, like, anybody in this room will tell you how many times we tried to stop and we just couldn't on our own.
Yeah.
That's when I knew that I needed to be at this meeting. And then the next big step was talking to my husband. And that's a whole other ball of wax. But, when I came to my first meeting here, it was a speaker meeting, and the speaker spoke for the entire meeting, I believe. And it was an old timer, who I don't see. I know he still goes. He just doesn't come to this meeting anymore. And he said some shocking as shit stuff. But some stuff that he talked about was like really debasing and demoralizing. But that stuff that I had thought about doing, or watched pornography of, like was said previously, some illegal shit, and so to be talking so openly and so vulnerable, opening yourself up in this honest way, talking about things like we talked about, like masturbation and illegal stuff, and talking so openly was like, I was shocked. I was really rather shocked the first time at my first meeting here. And, and I'm so grateful that the other women in the room came over to me and gave me their names and numbers, because I don't know that I would have come back, honestly.
That's a big part of it,
Yeah, for years and years, because this particular meeting that, we're recording after is, close to, 35, 40 people. And for years and years, it would be men, and one woman would walk in, and she wouldn't show up the next week.
Yeah.
And I was so grateful that once we got a core set of women that stuck around, and so when for yourself, when they were there, and you can kind of be part of that group as well.
Yeah.
So.
I'm just curious, from the perspective of a woman, why do you think so few women come?
I've pondered that, because I know in other parts of the country, it's like 50-50.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, I've heard that in other parts of the country that there are a lot of women that go to meetings up the Pacific Northwest. There's quite a few women at those meetings. I don't know what it is about the Bay Area.
Yeah.
The women that do come, and that I've kind of talked to after, I think it's just really scary. And it's scary to walk in as a sex addict, with a group of men, thinking that, especially some of these women that have come in that are very attractive, and I think they feel very, very uncomfortable. And, you have to be ready to be here. And maybe it's just not their time. I know I go to other meetings, and my one other meeting I go to, there's another woman who's there, that's my sponsor, who's got long-term sobriety. But we rarely get any women there either. I wish I knew why there are not more women coming in this particular region of this United States.
Yeah, I was just curious if it was a stigma, like, attached to, there's more labels for a woman being hypersexual than a man being, you know what I mean? There's more of a negative connotation, it seems. And so I was wondering if that was part of it, or just, but it is pretty intimidating, I think, to come into a...
And I think, because I've done some women telemeetings over my years here, and a lot of them it's just too much to come to. Especially, I know some women that I've talked to that the trauma has been, from other men, and they don't want to being around men, especially male sex addicts, is just too much.
Yeah.
You know, so going to a mixed meeting is just not a good match for them.
Yeah. So some of the other meetings that I attend are men's only, and a lot of them have issues with being around women.
Yeah,
Right.
Kind of
yeah.
the opposite type of thing. Something that we'll probably cover in a future talk is kind of the difference between the various S programs, and I know for Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, which is a different program than this, there seems to be closer to a 50-50 mix.
Yeah.
A lot of women go through more of the love addiction, but there are plenty of women that it is the sex that is the addiction, the masturbation, the pornography, the anonymous hookups, and
Right.
all
Right.
that sort of
Right.
stuff. So
Yeah. I think, that's something we've talked long about, at retreats and other meetings is, how do we attract more women? And I don't know the answer. I don't think anybody really knows the answer. We just make it, make sure that are women at meetings, and, and if the, woman newcomer comes in, that we welcome her, and,
Yeah.
and tell her it's okay, and, and give her, I always, with a woman newcomer, I always give my name and phone number, and, and tell them it's okay to call, but they have to be ready for it,
Yeah.
And it is very difficult to walk in, especially this room, because this is such a large meeting. It's very difficult as a woman to come in here.
yeah. Yeah, I know, I have a large fear of the unknown, so going to my first meeting was very difficult.
Yeah, that's very tough.
Going to my first retreat, which is incredibly, transformative, but I was scared shitless because I didn't know what to anticipate.
Right.
So once, I get familiar with other people and know how things are going to happen, it becomes more freeing for me, and I can able to talk freely.
Yeah.
So, anything else we want to cover tonight?
I think I'm good.
No, that's good.
I think it's
All
a
right,
good
cool.
start.
time.
So we'll be recording more of these, and we'll see if we can get a room
Yeah.
after the meeting, or if we just use this room.
Yeah. SAA, get a room.
Get a room.
I think that's our problem, is we do get room.
You do get rooms,
With
and
anonymous
then
strangers.
people. Yeah, exactly, and that's it's completely another topic for
Yeah.
a
Keep
future
coming back.
episode. Yeah. All right.
Well, thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Awesome.
All right.
Cool.
Well, if you've never been to an SAA meeting before and were thinking about it, I hope this episode set aside any fears that you might have. And if you have been to an SAA meeting, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'd love to hear any feedback that you might have about your first meeting experiences, or if you have any feedback about the podcast itself, any future topics you might want to hear on the podcast, or any general questions that you have about sex addiction. You can email us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you need to find a meeting, you can always visit the meetings page at the BayAreaSAA.org website. Right now, most or all of our meetings are pretty much all on Zoom. And there are either links or contact information about how to join a meeting. We've been fortunate to have people from all across the country and other countries join in some of our Bay Area meetings now that we're on Zoom. You can also find meetings, literature, and other information at the main ISO website, saa-recovery.org. And I'd like to thank you again for listening to this episode, and I hope you join us on the next episode where I will be sharing my personal story. And until then, I hope to see some of you at a meeting. Thanks for listening. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.